I'm Chris Burns, and welcome to The Network, hard talk with a matrix of newsmakers. The headlines. The Greek referendum against a painful bailout plan comes a year after a populist eurosceptic surge in European elections. The threat of a Grexit has deeply shaken the EU. While EU officials prepared for a worst-case scenario, eurosceptic leaders were cheering, like UKIP's Nigel Farage.
The European project is actually beginning to die.
So, are they right? Is the Greek crisis only the starkest example of a multi-speed Europe headed for a downsizing or even extinction? European leaders are also deeply divided over migration. And will Spain be the next crisis? With elections there in autumn, eurosceptic parties have surged in the polls amid anger over EU-mandated austerity policies there. Now, wired into this edition of the network here at the European Parliament in Brussels, Pavel Telička, a Czech MEP, Vice President of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats, or ALDE. Pierre Vimont of the think tank Carnegie Europe and a former diplomat. And Pablo Bustinduy, coordinator of the European Parliament delegation of Podemos, the Spanish leftist party. Welcome to all of you. A question to all of you, starting with Pavel. Is this the beginning of the end for the EU, or at least the euro? Is a eurogedden just a matter of time?
Well, in the introduction, Mr. Farage said yes. Well, he's usually wrong. I would say it might rather be the beginning of a new beginning. But of course, Mr. Tsipras has to fight his battle back at home. And the EU has to realize, as well as the Eurozone, that this was just one battle and there are many more to fight if the EU and the Eurozone are to deliver on real issues for the citizens.
Okay, Pierre, what do you think?
I think it's one of the most difficult crises Europe had to face in its history. And we have to be reminded that we're facing a very terrible financial and economic crisis. But I think Europe will find a way out of it, as it did in the past.
Pablo, will we find a way out or not?
It is a very troublesome period, a very troublesome moment. And certainly the idea that associated Europe with a haven for social rights, for peace, solidarity, and the coexistence of nations is now beginning to be questioned because of the intransigence of the creditors towards a country that is having a really hard time.
Okay, now Die Zeit, the German newspaper, mentions not only the Greek crisis, we're looking at an erosion of Hungarian democracy, they say, immigration crises, the prospect of Brexit, the rise of the far-right parties, and that solutions are found in late-night meetings among leaders instead of some kind of parliamentary process. Does not this spell some kind of end of the EU eventually, because we're going from crisis to crisis? Pavel?
Well, yes, I think that it is fair to say that the EU has been in too many crises in recent years. From that point of view, I think that there is every reason to be somewhat skeptical. But at the same time, I think it's an opportunity. And on the parliamentary dimension, I need to say we have invited our group leader, Mr. Verhofstadt, Mr. Tsipras, to the parliament. We had a very solid debate, and maybe that was one of those issues that triggered off a deal that was finally found.
Pablo, what do you think?
I think that there is a structural problem in the European Union, which is a confrontation, a clash between austerity and the kind of economic policies that have been imposed by unelected organs on several peoples of the European Union since the crisis, and democracy. If Europe loses this fundamental link with the democratic element, then we are in big trouble.
Well, exactly. There are leaders that are settling this. It's going from top down instead of more bottom up. Pierre, you do advising for Donald Tusk now and then. Is this not seen as a fundamental problem, that just leaders are finding a solution as opposed to parliaments?
I mean, it's true, and we always have been facing this problem for many years, as we have been facing late-night meetings. This is nothing new. But first of all, don't underestimate the fact that national parliaments are taking a big say in what is happening now. After all, this is what has been happening in Greece. This is what we've been talking about Bundestag with Germany. So this is there. But I think the real issue is about how to put our house in order and how to make this house, this European house, work a little bit more efficiently than it has done in the past. We will have to look at this again.
Okay. Well, Mr. Juncker, the president of the European Commission, says that really the solution to the Greek crisis is deeper economic and monetary union. But is anybody in the mood to do that now? Pablo?
Well, when we look at Greece and we see that the kind of policies that have been imposed there since the beginning of the financial crisis have created that 2/3 of the productive system has been demolished, have created that they have lost 27% of their GDP, and that when the Greek people votes for a different option, the kind of reaction that we see from the establishment is imposing the same kind of logic and policies, then we see that, I mean, there is a problem that needs to be solved somehow, and that is a political alternative.
Okay, Pavel, there's this one-size-fits-all monetary policy. How can we impose that even further?
Greece should have done better in recent years in terms of really their homework. I mean, the EU has its homework, and we really need to fine-tune on some of the systemic weaknesses of euro. But, we haven't caused the problem of Greece. I think Greece has been living well above, let's say, certain standards. And I think that Greece now has to perform on the structural reforms so that it can really integrate much better in the eurozone in the future.
Pierre, sort of following up on my previous question, is the EU doomed because it doesn't look like it will ever achieve political and monetary union?
No, I think what we're witnessing, after all, let's not forget that the economic and monetary union is still very young, less than, let's say, 15 years, more or less. And what we're witnessing is the first result of that economic union, which have shown that the strong have become stronger and the weak have become weaker. And we need to readapt that, which means structural changes and, more than anything else, reviving our economic and social model to make it more competitive towards the rest of the world.
Okay, but there are a lot of leaders that are talking about this, having sort of a common European space, solidarity among all countries, but at the same, is that just lip service? Because at the same time, a lot of them are talking about their national interests. They're looking over their shoulder at their voters. How are they going to be able to continue this European project? Pablo.
If one takes into account the fact that since the beginning of the crisis, 19 governments have been voted out of office by their voters, there is obviously a problem of dissatisfaction with the political class in Europe. And that is because the difference between the left and the right, the center left and the center right, has collapsed under austerity. Every single government applies the same policies. We need to carve out space for a political, democratic alternative that will renew the European project.
Okay, but is this not a question of national interest overriding a common European interest?
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. Europe has changed, and I think that some of the European policies of member states have become too much national focused. But if I may contradict what just has been said a minute ago, I think that we've got clearly member states which were really quite poor, had difficulties, were basically on the edge of bankruptcy, like, for example, the Baltics. They have introduced very deep structural reforms, and they are doing very well indeed today. And on the EU side, clearly we need a new economic governance. That is absolutely correct.
Okay, and will Spain be the next crisis, do you think, Pierre?
Oh, it's not a question about Spain or Portugal or France or Italy. It's a question of the whole European Union that has to face the fact that its present economic and social model needs to be readjusted and change. I think Pablo is right in saying that austerity can't be the only answer, because the real problem is about reform. You need austerity in the sense of some austerity, depends on the level, in order to put your house back in order. But the real issue for the Europeans is how to reform our union, better governance, a new model to become more competitive. This is really what it's all about.
Pablo, I mean, your party, Podemos, could rise very well in this autumn elections in Spain. Could that put you in a position, as it put in Greece also, a crisis that you will face with no real alternative?
No, I don't think so. I think that the Greek government made a first step that will continue in some other countries in order to not to express an eurosceptic message, but to express the need to renew the European project so that it serves the needs of the people. I think that Spain will be a decisive moment of that political change that we need in order to avoid the structural problems that these economic policies have put the peoples of Europe that are the ones who are paying the price of these failed policies.
Thanks very much, Pablo. That's all the time we've got for now. I'd like to thank our guests, Pavel Telichka, Pablo Bustinduy, and Pierre Vimont. I'm Chris Burns, and until next time, thanks for connecting with The Network.